Sir John Gielgud.
All right, I worked with Sir John on 3 shows. The first was School for Scandal, which I thought all English people were so happy because the School for Scandal company was such a joyful thing, but I realized Sir John, who was also the director, made it. His persona, the actors had such a good time. Ralph Richardson, Sir Ralph Richardson, Geraldine McEwen, Richard Easton, wonderful cast. And then His Age is a Man I worked on. And then I had been working for Alexander Cohen, the producer, and he said to me one day, we're going to be working on Hamlet. John Gielgud's directing it, Richard Burton starring in it, and you're going to handle the press. Well, that was a little bit of news because Richard Burton had recently discovered someone named Elizabeth Taylor. And some of you might remember that it was a worldwide scandal. The close equivalent to it now may have been Brad and Angelina, only it was Richard and Elizabeth with talent, which was the difference. By the time Cleopatra was finished and they went to Puerto Vallarta where Richard was filming Night of the Iguana, and we watched the paparazzi found their way to this obscure little town in Mexico. We thought, my God, what's going to happen when they come to New York? And it was decided that rehearsals would be in Toronto at the O'Keefe Center where the play was opening, and we thought that would alleviate the paparazzi bombardment. Well, we were wrong. I arrived at the King Edward Hotel, and it was being picketed by 100 members of the Legion of Decency because in 1963, Richard and Elizabeth, not yet married, both having separated from their spouses. She was married to, for some inexplicable reason, she had been married to Eddie Fisher. He was married to Sybil Burton. And so they were picketing because they were living in sin in 1963. And hundreds of people just to get a glimpse mainly of Elizabeth. So they had to clear the dining room, and I'm brought in to lunch. And there at the lunch is, I've dined out on this one forever, John Gielgud, Alex Cohen, Richard Burton, Elizabeth Taylor. For me, I call it a business lunch. They wanted to know what's the publicity? Here's the list of people that want to interview Richard. I had talked to Tom Prideaux at Life magazine and suggested Richard for a cover because we were opening in New York in April, which was the 400th anniversary of Billy Shakespeare's birthday, and I thought that Richard would be the perfect cover to celebrate the birthday. Life magazine agreed, and I said, Richard, if photographers will come up to Toronto, and that was agreed, and they said, what else? And I said, here's the list. You know, John Springer, who's Richard's personal press agent, he and I can go over and decide whatever works for your schedule. The show was completely sold out in Toronto, Boston, and New York. It was just a matter of what Richard wanted to do. So then they said, well, what about, Richard said, what about the cast? Who's in, who's set? What's the production schedule? At which point Elizabeth Taylor turned to me and said, they don't need us for that. Let's go sit over there. So I was forced to have lunch with Elizabeth Taylor. I couldn't help but notice that she was very attractive. Really, you've heard about the eyes. She's stunning, just stunning. The thing that surprised me was that she was very other-oriented. She wanted to know all about me. I was very young and I looked younger, believe it or not. And she wanted to know how I got the job, what else had I worked on, where was I from, where did I go to school, and she was interviewing me. And what she said was, this is all very new for Richard, this paparazzi and the crowds and everything. She said, I grew up with it. And so Richard can't bar hop like he used to. We're sort of confined to wherever we are. She said, I always make my friends wherever I'm working. And what she said to me is, will you be my friend? Oh, all right. While Richard was rehearsing, I was hanging out with Elizabeth. And I'll get to the John Gielgud one. But so Elizabeth asked if I would be her date for opening night in Toronto. Okay. And I like to say I'm one of the few men that dated Elizabeth Taylor that didn't marry. She was not only a joy to be with, and I must say years later when she surfaced as the first celebrity to question the silence on AIDS, and she challenged Reagan after Rock Hudson died. I was not surprised at all. She was a woman of great heart and compassion. Gielgud, during the rehearsal, do any of you remember Sir John Gielgud? Certainly the greatest English-speaking actor of my time. And my time is forever. And at the first rehearsal, the equity people come in and they do all, pick the equity dep and they give all the rules. And then they do a reading of the play, and then they break for lunch, at which point Sir John came over to me and said, "Yeah, David, are you going to be in Toronto?" And I said, "Mostly during the rehearsals, yes, Sir John." He said, "Would you do me a great favor?" "Anything, Sir John. Would you mind lunching with me?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "Let me explain. When I'm directing, I don't want to be with the actors while I'm having lunch. They're so needy. And it would be a great thing. If I eat alone, they'll always come over to ask me about some business. And I would appreciate it if it's not too much trouble if you would lunch with me when it's convenient." "Oh, all right," said John. "I'll lunch with you." It was just extraordinary because it was like a doctoral class in English history of theater. He was telling me stories about Ellen Terry and Sybil Thorndike and Edith Evans, and about 15 stories about Laddie, till I realized I didn't want to know I didn't ask who Laddie was until I found out it was Sir Laurence Olivier. And I used to think, oh, if I had a tape recorder, if I knew how to work a tape recorder, I would have been, it was just wonderful. And when the show opened in New York one day, I was at Alex Gunn's office, and one of the secretaries said, "It's John Gielgud on the phone, he wants to talk to you." I said, "Well, of course, he's my lunch buddy." And Sir John said, "There, it's my 60th birthday, and I'm having people over in my flat. Would you join us?" I said, "Well, I'll check my social schedule." So it was after theater on a weekday night, and I went up there, and I walked into the room, and I realized I was probably the only person there that had not been on the cover of Life or Time magazine. The first thing he does is grab me, and he says, "David, you know Dorothy and Lillian?" It was the Gish sisters. The Gish sisters were stars in silent movies, Orphans of the Storm. And Lillian had been his Juliet and his Romeo in 1936. Everybody was there. And my sister said the height of arrogance was when I said, I was so relieved when Hugh Gronin and Jessica Tandy arrived, I had someone to talk to. Because Hugh was playing Polonius, and I had gotten to know him. My sister said, "Don't tell anyone that when you're saying you're so relieved that just Hugh and Jessie came in."